in certain places, which of course affects his income and his ability. And he had to leave the country for a while. So he continued to do his work from outside the country, and then he came back and continued to do it within the country. So the picture, the picture that I'm trying to portray here is that, yes, racism and oppression affect the arts, perhaps a no-brainer. But for someone who's concerned with the evolution of the arts, their importance within all cultures, in fact, the history of the world, these findings were important to help develop an understanding that may be immediately transferable to classroom situations. And to a certain extent, to be able to talk about some of the psychological hurts that people experience as a result of this, and have it be at some distance from our own culture, so that they can hear how artists struggle with fear and self-doubt, and how this might affect their work. And that if we are a culture that values the arts of any kind, then we have to recognize what we do almost at every turn. We have to be self-aware of ourselves as teachers, as citizens, and perhaps as a government, although I'm not terribly hopeful for most governments. But as individuals, that we have a contribution to make. And there are very clear ways in which we can do that. I think if I were to talk about the most important aspect of all this, knowing that we are also a post-colonial country, that the United States has inherited its own post-colonial legacy from Great Britain, which was one of the major players in the slave trade. And we have, for several hundred years now, played out that same role, is an important piece of information. Now, whether or not that can ever affect anything at a higher political level is extremely doubtful in my mind. That's my particular cynicism here. But I do believe that that is a big piece of what's playing out here, is that the institutional post-colonial policies of this country have encouraged attitudes, behaviors, opinions, laws, and an ingrained notion of right, wrong, left, right, black, white, that we still struggle with. And I don't think the government is willing to acknowledge, at least in any kind of substantive way. I don't want to blame any one government or any one individual. That's not the purpose of this study or anything else. But there are forces at play that are larger than all of us, and I think that's the important piece that we must keep in mind, is that it's not just what are my attitudes and beliefs, but what is my role within this society. And you can look at that from a point of view of entitlement, or education, what you believe. And from my point of view, the values of a freer society, of a society that is less governed by its own history, are the important points that we should work with. Having said that, I will never run for office. I'll stop there before I get myself into deeper water. But I would like to hear back from all of you. I would like to encourage discussion and feedback and your own thinking on this very vexing problem that we all face.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you, you might not be comfortable, you might not want to talk about. I'm curious, you presented this to your classes here. I'm curious about some of the reactions and whether it did, in fact, right away get some students to see themselves in with another set of eyes. Because you would hope that, really. And sometimes folks reveal stuff right away. It's like, oh my God, I never thought about that. But as soon as you saw, as soon as you said, as soon as I saw, I started thinking, and then there's some self-revelation, some self-reflection. And of course, that's what education ought to have us do. And that's why I find this fascinating. But I don't know, maybe a couple of...
The most common reaction is students identifying experiences they've had in the classroom as themselves as children, and how they felt isolated and marginalized, put down, discriminated against for a variety of reasons. So being able to make the connection between what's here and what's here is, I think, the piece that has the great value.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's in teaching. Absolutely.
I'm also aware that in the process of talking about this and sort of not following my script, that I have not showed you all the slides that I prepared for today. That also might provide some context. So let me
Thank
jump
you.
to
We
that.
like that. Yeah.
Let's see.
I was going to ask you if you had some poetry.
You know, I actually do. I did bring a piece to read.
Okay.
Maybe I'll close with that. Self-descriptive, but you can see, without trying to show you 150 slides of all the things that I looked at here, I tried to give some examples that show differences. For instance, the National Museum of Modern Art in Managua is quite a wonderful place to be. Great art on the walls. They have a school within there. This was a student working on a piece at the school.
Softball nearby.
Always.
Always.
Perhaps what's most interesting about this contrast is that there is no slide of a museum from the East Coast of Nicaragua.
Is there one there, though?
No.
No. Okay.
There's no museum and there are no galleries.
Oh, my.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
This is a Museum of Natural History, National, let's see, my ability to speak is falling apart, Natural History and Anthropology, with a whole series of quite wonderful sculpture that is pre-Mayan and dated the volcanic rock that's abounding in the area. And most of them, you might be able to see, I think my laser is dead. The human figure has an animal crawling upon its back, or sometimes the human might have an animal head, as a reflection of the culture that existed there. And this, the one on the right, I believe it was a lizard, and the one on the left, I'm thinking it was a cow, but I'm not remembering at this point. So you can see there are places where everybody can go and look at their own history, contemporary art forms. Now, I'm going to show you a few slides of contemporary art forms that were photographed in Managua. And ask if you notice anything about those 4 slides you just saw.
No people of color.
That's correct. No people of color. Even in the primitive paintings that were of self-taught people. This is a primitive landscape. And I use the word primitive not as a derogative term, but just indicative contemporary term of someone who's not trained professionally. Where is it? This level. There's one place where it shows up. The FSLN shows up prominently in a number of different paintings in this particular museum.
Is it really?